那么所以他就创立了一个研究院，专门研究科学与灵性的关系。所以今天跟圣严法师来对话，实在是非常荣幸。我们现在以热烈的掌声欢迎 Dr. Mitchell。我想还是也用这个机会来介绍，圣严法师是世界上第一个创造心灵环保，数十年来一直都在推动提高人的品质，建设人间净土，成为《天下》杂志获为400年来台湾最具影响力的50位人士之一。我们热烈欢迎圣严法师。
Good morning. It does work. Good morning.
So we're going to start the dialogue this morning, and I'm going to ask you and圣严法师questions.
Okay.
And then maybe through this dialogue, we can create some sparks. Dr. Mitchell, I think one of the epiphany you have experienced is when you come back from the moon and you experience some earth-shattering, mind-boggling experience. Can you share that in very short time so that maybe Master圣严sort of can respond with the Buddha's point of view?
Yes, it was after the completion of the work on the lunar surface successfully, and we were starting home, and the orientation of the spacecraft coming home was such that we were flying sideways, as it were, and rotating, and that was to keep thermal balance on the spacecraft from the sun, to make sure that the spacecraft was equally heated all around and cooled, and to keep excess heat from building up. But what that allowed to happen was that every 2 minutes as we rotated, this picture of Earth, of the moon, of the sun, and 360 degrees of the heavens was visible in the spacecraft window. And we must point out that in space, because of the lack of the atmosphere to obstruct the vision of the stars, we see the stars when we look as twinkling. But in space, without that atmosphere that causes the twinkling, you see the stars brightly just as they are, and they are 10 times brighter and 10 times more stars than you can possibly see from the highest mountain on Earth on the clearest night. And what this does, as I watched this, it was utterly magnificent. Some of you may have seen some of the recent pictures from the Hubble Space Telescope. What we can see in space with the naked eye is almost what we can see, but not quite at the depth, but almost, it's like what we can see in space just looking with the eye or in our small little telescope that we had. And the universe is so magnificent, so beautiful, that it just defies description. You have to see it to understand it. And I realized from my training at Harvard and MIT in the United States in astronomy, getting my doctorate, I've understood that the molecules of my body and the molecules in the spacecraft and the molecules in my partner's bodies were created in star systems. That's how the matter in our universe is created, the heavy matter. It's made in star systems. And instead of being an intellectual idea for me at that point, it was a visceral idea. It was at the feeling level. It was the emotional level. That those were my molecules created in an ancient star system. And I was akin to the stars. And it was a feeling of ecstasy and joy to recognize this connection to the whole universe and to feel it in that way. And this experience continued when I wasn't working. I still had work to do, of course, in flying the spacecraft. But when I got a chance to look out the window as we rotated and saw this magnificent panorama of the heavens and the earth, the moon, and the sun, it was just overwhelming, and I felt this joy and ecstasy at being a part of this. And I realized that we humans on earth, forever, throughout our whole history of evolution from coming up, that we had always asked the questions as we looked into the heavens. That, who am I? What is this all about? What's my relationship to all that is? And I thought as this was happening that maybe now that we, the first generation of spacefaring people, to go off our planet and see Earth and the heavens from this different perspective of space, that maybe we ought to re-ask those ancient questions all over again, and from the point of view of being a spacefaring civilization. And I realized that between science, which is a fairly modern development in human understanding, its modern form beginning in the West at least, only about 400 years ago with Sir Isaac Newton and the great thinkers of that period 400 years ago, that a great distinction was made in the 17th century, U.S. count or Western count, in the 17th century, by the great thinker, philosopher René Descartes, who came to the conclusion body and mind, physicality and spirituality belong to different realms of reality. Now that served a very noble purpose in the West, because at that point in Western history, the church was persecuting those who disagreed to the point of burning them at the stake for disagreeing with the church. And the Cartesian conclusion that body, mind, physicality, and spirituality were two different things and didn't interact, it caused the Inquisition, which was the police agency of the early church, caused them to quit burning people at the stake for disagreeing with theory, as long as they stayed away from mind, consciousness, and spirituality. Thus, science in the Western world for the last 400 years grew up as a materialist, strictly materialist concept, without any understanding whatsoever of mind, spirituality, or that side of human existence. Until the 20th century and quantum mechanics came along. But that's enough of that story for the moment. As I came back and landed on Earth, I could not understand this ecstasy, this magnificent experience I'd had in space. So I started asking questions about it and reading, and found nothing in the science literature that would explain this type of ecstasy. I looked in the religious literature of the West, nothing I could find. And then I got some help from other scholars and started looking in the ancient mystical literature, and found in the Sanskrit of ancient India the concept of samadhi. It was called samadhi, and it was the experience of seeing things separately like they are, but experience them internally and at a level of emotion as connected oneness, as unity, and a blissful, ecstatic response to that. And that was the experience. I said, yes, that's exactly what happened in space.
So in other words, you know you are one with everything else.